So you finished your quilt and you're ready to show it off in a quilt show. Now what? Hey everybody, it's Ian the Off Kilter Crafter. I hope you're having a great day today. Today I'm going to be talking about my experiences as I've been entering quilt shows, what to do, what not to do, and the lessons that I've learned so far. Now, I'll qualify this video by saying I'm not an expert at entering quilt shows, and in fact, there are a lot of varying opinions about entering quilt shows and what to do and stuff like that. I'm going to tell you what I have learned during the process, but there is obviously more ways than one to go about this, so this is one way that I have learned and techniques and things that I have learned personally, but you're going to find a lot of other opinions and other ways to do things here on YouTube, so make sure to check out those videos as well. Now, with the experiences that I have had, I have entered several different types of shows across the country that include judge shows where judges take a look at quilts, they make marks to indicate how well they think you did on your quilt and compare them to the rest of the quilts in the show. I've also done shows that are non-judged, so there's no judging in the show, it's just about displaying artwork. Now, it can be pretty nerve-wracking putting your work out there in front of an audience and even judges because you never quite know what the judges are going to say, and it can feel very scary to have their commentary come back to you and you're scared that they're going to say something really mean or just hurtful, but I have found that 99.9% of the time, judges give good feedback and they may not like something and I may disagree with them, but that's their opinion and they're able to mark that down, but I don't always have to agree with it. All right, let's get started and start off with a misconception that I hear all the time about quilt shows, that you have to hand bind your binding in order for it to be entered into a quilt show. That is simply not true. In fact, all the quilts that I've ever entered into a quilt show have always had a machine-bound binding on them. So in fact, the quilt that you see behind me, Daydreamer, the Butterfly Effect, this quilt, as you see, has won 3 ribbons, and it has a machine-bound binding on it. Try saying that 5 times fast. It is a huge misconception, and guys, it's just not true. There are plenty of quilts out there that have beautiful machine-bound binding on them, and it's just not true. I'm just going to put it out there. It's just not true. So if you ever are worried that putting that binding on by machine is going to ruin its value or ruin it from being entered into a show, don't believe that for one bit. There are several videos out there on YouTube that talk about machine binding your quilts. Becca has one out there that you can check out. Make sure to check that out. I'll put a link to it down in the description. And of course, I have a video on glue-based binding, and you can use those methods in order to finish out your quilts. And yes, you can still enter them into a quilt show. Okay, so you've machine bound your quilt. You are now ready to enter it in a show. How do you find a show to enter? Well, there are a lot of different ways. There are several companies that run national shows across the country, like AQS. You can enter using their websites, go to their websites and check them out. But there are also a lot of local shows as well. In fact, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I know of the North Texas Quilt Festival. I know of the Plano Quilt Show. I almost said Quilt Festival. I think their show is the Plano Quilt Show. Anyways, there are a lot of quilt shows out there, and I'm pretty sure there are probably other quilt shows here in DFW that I don't know about. A lot of times you hear about them through word of mouth. Make sure to talk to your guild members. If they don't already talk about that during your guild meetings, make sure to check out and talk to your other guild members, because more than likely they'll have some knowledge. I've also found that there are a few different lists put out on the internet that list all of the shows, or at least a majority of the shows out there across the country. I'm going to put a link to one of those down in the description of this video. By the time you watch this video in a year or two from now, obviously that list is not going to be up to date. However, I have found that even if you are looking at an older list, it will give you an idea of what shows are coming up, because most of the time those shows are still going on and they're going to be around the same time frame. So if you're watching this video in 2025, 2026, 2050, whatever you're watching it in, that list may still be a comprehensive list. It just is showing for 2024. And usually that person, at least the one that I'm referring to down in the description, she'll put out a new blog post and tell you what the shows are for that current year. And honestly, if you need help finding shows, Google is your best friend. Type into Google, quilt show near me, all those kind of keywords and see what you can find. It is a lot of digging, but I guarantee you're going to find some shows that you'll be able to enter. Next up on the list is make sure to read the rules. Every show is going to be different, and each show, it feels like, has its own set of rules about what is accepted, what is not accepted, all sorts of different things. So it is so important that you take the time to read the rules, read the categories that are going to be available for you to enter. Just take the time to read each and every one of the details. It will help save you in the end. Along with reading the rules, it's also going to tell you if it is a regional show, so something that is specific to that area, and if you are outside of that area, if you will be able to enter or not. It'll also give you other details like if they accept kits. Some shows do not accept kits, which I found out as I went to enter some shows across the country and read the rules and realized that my beautiful, beautiful Vortex quilt would not be accepted because it was a kit. It's really a bummer, and I wish I could get it out there further because I really want to show off my quilters quilting on it, but I gotta follow the rules. So make sure to take the time to read those rules and see if kits are allowed, block of the months, stuff like that. There are some very specific things that you need to be paying attention to so that way you don't get a quilt rejected. It's also important because sometimes in the rules, it will tell you if you will get feedback from the judges on your entry. For instance, some shows, they do give you the sheet that has all of the marks that you received on your quilt, while other shows keep that a secret process, so you will never find out what the judges liked or didn't like about your quilt. The Dallas Quilt Show is one of those shows that does not give feedback, so I don't really know why this quilt won the Honorable Mention Award, but it's still pretty cool that it won. So just pay attention to those rules and see if in those rules it lists if those judges are going to be giving their feedback to you, or if you just may never know. All right, let's talk a moment about categories. A lot of shows will have different categories: hand applique, machine quilting, hand quilting. There are so many different categories. And again, it seems like every show has their own disbursement of categories that quilts can fit into. Now, from personal experience, when I entered the Dallas Quilt Show with my Vortex quilt, I entered it into the wrong category. And in fact, I'm pretty sure if I had entered it into the right category, I might have ended up with a ribbon, at the very least an honorable mention. If I had entered it into the right category of kits and blocks of the month, there were only 8 entries. My quilt would have made a 9th entry, and with the number of ribbons that they were giving out, I'm almost certain that it would have come away with some kind of award. But because I had entered it into 2-person large, which means it's in the large quilt category, and it was done by 2 people, myself being the piecing person and my quilter being the quilting person, it was a very competitive category. So unfortunately, because I entered it into the wrong category, it did not receive a ribbon. Now, that doesn't mean that it was a waste. In fact, I actually learned a valuable lesson of making sure to enter the right category, but it also was displayed in what I feel like was a pretty prominent spot where I feel a lot of eyes got onto that quilt. So even though I entered it into the wrong category, I still feel like I won because a lot of people got to see that quilt, and I feel like my quilter got some great exposure from that as well. So am I sad that I didn't win an award? Yeah, I'm sad I didn't get a ribbon, but I still got a lot of people taking pictures of it and, just seeing it and taking it in. So I feel like I've won, and I'm still happy that I entered it into that show. So again, make sure to read those descriptions of the categories because they can be so important. It is so important not to enter a 2-person quilt. Again, somebody who, maybe worked on the piecing and then somebody who did the quilting. Don't enter that into a 1-person quilt because then that could get you disqualified really quickly. Also, there are sometimes categories for quilt bees. So if you did a quilt with a quilt bee, or if you just worked with several people on that quilt, there may be a specific category that you can enter, so that way it is designated that multiple people worked on this quilt and things of that nature. So again, just read those descriptions and make sure that you are putting your quilt in the correct category. All right, so you've decided which shows you want to enter your quilt in. How do you keep it all organized? I enter several shows across the country, and it can be kind of hard keeping all the deadlines straight. You have to keep the entrance deadline. You have to keep the when you need to deliver the quilts. If you're either delivering it by hand or if you're mailing an entry, there are so many things to keep up, and it is so important to document all that, at least if you're entering several shows like I am. I have an Excel spreadsheet that keeps all of this information for me, and I go in at least once a month to see what shows are upcoming, when deadlines are upcoming. All that information is super important, and I write down all the information in it. I also include some other information such as what category I entered into. I also keep, did it win a ribbon at that show? Did it win a prize award like moolah? Did it win any money? Because some shows do give prize money for winning, and I document that as well. I document where the show is, how many days it's going to be gone, because sometimes quilt shows like the Houston Quilt Fest, is that the right name for it? I think it is. There is a long window that quilt is going to be gone. In fact, it's going to be gone for 6 months, which can be just crazy amount of time. So make sure to document all that information so that way you have it down. There is a great blog post from Kelly Spell that I'm going to link to down in the description of this video. She actually wrote a blog post about how to keep track of your quilts. She also links to an Excel document that she uses. I took that document, made it my own, and I use that document to help kind of keep track of the quilts as they're going and coming. I also created a tab in that Excel spreadsheet. I can't remember if she already had it or if I added it on, but I actually have an Excel spreadsheet that has all 12 months of the year, and it shows me each month exactly the overlap of quilts and where they're going to be, so that way I don't accidentally commit a quilt to be in 2 places at the same time. And like I said, it also helps me document any prize winnings, and I forgot to mention, quilt shows a lot of times have an entry fee. Sometimes they can be as low as $5, but I have seen up to $50, $60 to enter. So keep that in there as well, so that way when you come around to it next year and you want to enter another quilt, you can see exactly how much it's going to cost you, and you can kind of budget that in. Now, most shows, if not all shows, require a quilt label in either the left or the, well, for y'all, the left or the right corner of the quilt. It's very important to make sure to attach that on and keep that on there. A lot of times they also want a flap to be put over it. So a lot of times I'll just take a scrap piece of fabric and safety pin it over the label to make sure that it stays hidden during judging. Now, there are a lot of videos here on YouTube that kind of tell you and walk you through the process of putting on a label onto your quilt. But I have found that, again, it can be kind of hard to figure out like which shows want you to put it where. So I have a secret tool, and that secret tool is carpet tape. Now, you might be wondering, how in the world does carpet tape factor into a quilt show? Well, if a show wants a specific corner with a label in it, I sometimes don't have my label in that corner and I have to improvise. Now, this isn't always recommended, and some shows may frown upon this, but I have made it work and so far have not had any quilts rejected because of it. But what I will do is I will take another scrap piece of fabric, I'll fill in all my information, and then I'll use carpet tape to adhere that information into the corner that the show wants it in. So if, for instance, if I have a label on the right side of my quilt and they want it on the left side of my quilt, instead of taking off the label or even creating a permanent one to go on the left, I will take some carpet tape, put all the information onto that piece of scrap fabric, and then stick it on the back of my quilt. The fabric tape, or excuse me, the carpet tape holds very strongly, and I have not had a problem with it falling off or coming loose. So carpet tape is your friend, especially if you're wanting to take photos of your quilt. This is also super helpful information if you move locations and they require your address to be on the quilt label. I know in my old apartment, I sent off a quilt and got it back, and the address was then incorrect when I moved to my new apartment. So what I did is I took a scrap piece of white fabric, I wrote my new address on it, and I attached it with some carpet tape, so that way it's almost permanent. It will come off if it gets too hot or if somebody tried to pull it off, but it covered up my old address and allowed me to have my new address on it without any problem. It can also be very helpful if you want to take photos of your quilt while it's like hanging up on a wall. Make sure though you don't do it on a painted wall because it will pull off the paint. So that carpet tape is really strong. It's perfect because it's temporary, but it is so strong as it will pull off the paint. So don't ever put it on a painted wall. But if you're just doing a regular brick wall or stone wall or something like that, you could put the fabric tape on the back top part of your quilt, stick it to the wall, take your pictures, and then you can peel it away and you won't be leaving any marks or damaging the wall in any way. And it does pull off of your quilt. You may have to go slowly on it, but it does come off the quilt and leaves no marks or residue. Now, it's important to think about shipping deadlines if you're entering shows outside of your area and can't hand deliver them. Make sure to keep those shipping deadlines and shipping delays in mind. If you are entering a show that is going to be close to November, December, Christmas, all of that, it can slow down your package shipment and it may cost you more to get your package shipped to the quilt show in a reasonable time. So keep that all in mind as you're entering shows. You also need to keep in mind cost. It can be very expensive to send quilts to other locations. I know when I entered the Sisters Outdoor Quilt Show, because that is a more remote location, it was so expensive to send my quilt to that location. It was worth it. I loved seeing my quilt out there at the show, but just keep it in mind and factor it in whenever you're working through a budget. Now, not only can shipping be scary because of the cost and timelines, but also what if they lose your quilt? That is why I always include an air tag inside of my quilt. I've done a video on how to sew an air tag behind the quilt label. You can check that video out. I'll put it in the description of this video so you can go check it out if you haven't already. I use that air tag to help kind of keep track of it, even though the shipper usually has some kind of reference as to where the quilt is. I like to have my own insurance on it so that way I know exactly where that air tag is, and I can hopefully, if something were to happen, I could tell the shipper, hey, I'm seeing my air tag in this location. It's not a guarantee that that quilt will never be lost, but hopefully if it does get lost, it will be another tool that I can use for the shipper to hopefully figure out where the quilt is. It's not like I can just go out and like buy a plane ticket and go fly to where it is, but it's just a little more reassurance that hopefully if it does get lost, I have a way to recover it. Now, most major carriers, in fact, I think all of the major carriers, when you purchase shipping, they include insurance. But again, that insurance is just going to give you money for the loss. And a lot of times you have to prove how much value that product or that thing had inside of the package that they lost. And let's face it, there's no way to get your quilt back. You can't just, go to the store and purchase a new one. These are handmade objects and you just really can't get another one. So it's nice to have that insurance, but honestly, it's just going to cover the materials. It's not going to cover the time and all the work that I put into it. All right, so you've entered a show, you have your shipping dates, and you have everything ready to go. It is now time to get your quilt ready to ship. And one of the things that I do, even if I'm just delivering a quilt locally, not even shipping it out, but even just getting ready to put it into a show, whether I hand deliver it or ship it, I always make sure to lay a very clean bed sheet out on the floor and put my quilt on top of it and then use a lint roller to try and get all the lint off. It's amazing how much dust and thread and everything else our quilts collect, even just hanging up, not even doing anything. There's so much dust and debris that they pick up as they're just hanging around. So I always take the time to use a lint roller of some type to collect all of the excess hairs, especially if you have a pet. A lot of times quilt shows will actually deduct points if you have animal hair on your quilt. They really want a quilt to be show ready. So make sure to use that lint roller. Like I said, laying down that clean bed sheet will give you a space that you can use that lint roller. And then once you finish lint rolling, you can use that space to help fold your quilt. Now, I feel like a kind of controversial area on quilt shows is how to fold your quilt to get it to a quilt show, whether you're delivering it by hand or if you're shipping it out to a show. There's so many different ways to fold or roll a quilt. Now, speaking of folding, there are a lot of different ways to fold a quilt. Some people swear by specific methods of folding so that way creases don't get set into a quilt as it makes its way to a quilt show, whether you are hand delivering the quilt or putting it in a box to ship. There are so many different ways, and I'm actually going to leave 2 videos down in the description of this video on how to fold a quilt. One of them being a diagonal method, which some people swear by, saying that they don't get wrinkles set into their quilt. But I've also seen the butterfly method, which is kind of like making S curves and stuff like that. So many different ways. Choose what you feel is best for you. Some shows even allow you to roll quilts and ship them in tubes or long rectangular boxes. It just depends on the show. Some shows don't accept that at all. Again, read those rules and find out, and then you can decide which is going to be the best method for you. Now, if you're going to be entering a show and hand delivering the quilt, a lot of times those quilt shows will ask for some kind of container to put it in. And by container, I usually mean a pillowcase. A lot of people just use pillowcases because the quilts fit nicely in there. You don't have to sew up a bag for it. It's just easier to use a pillowcase. You usually either just write directly on the pillowcase your information, or a lot of times, since I like to reuse pillowcases, I will just do like a basting stitch with my information on a scrap piece of fabric, so that way I can just use the seam ripper and pull it off when I need to switch it out for another one. So if you're delivering in person, usually it's going to be a pillowcase. But if you're delivering a quilt to another location outside of your own space and area, you're going to need some kind of box, and a lot of times you're going to need a bag to put it in. I hope this never happens, but if a box is ever, gets wet or is damaged, it's so much better to have a quilt in the plastic bag so that it is hopefully a little more protected than if it's not and it gets wet. Like, that would be a shame. So if you're entering a quilt show outside of your area, a lot of times they're going to ask you to put it inside a plastic bag and then put that plastic bag inside a box to get it there safely. Now, something that is required by all quilt shows, I think there's only been one quilt show that I entered that did not require this, but I think almost all quilt shows require you to have a hanging sleeve on the back of your quilt. Basically, it is a tube of fabric that allows the pole that they use to hold your quilt up during the show to go through the backside of your quilt and have it displayed nicely for everyone. Honestly, I hate doing the quilt sleeve because most of the time it has to be hand placed onto the top of the quilt so that way it hangs. You can't see it because it's on the back side, but that's what's holding up this quilt right now. And it can get a little frustrating because you need like a D shape on the backside of the quilt with the flat side up against the back of the quilt. You need that space in there to allow the tube to go in, but if you have like a round one, the quilt will want to roll over the top or it wants to hang down below the bar. It can be so hard to get it perfect. Trust me, guys. I have struggled with putting on those quilt sleeves, and it's so hard to get it just right. Thankfully, quilt sleeves have become a lot easier after I downloaded the PDF tutorial from Cotton and Bourbon. There is a wonderful tutorial on how to create a quilt sleeve, and she uses, you sew a line at the top and the bottom to hold that extra space in and give you that nice space to put the bar in. It's really, it's made my life so much easier learning how to do it correctly. I'm going to put a link to that PDF down in the description below. It is a free PDF. Highly recommend, if you want to enter quilt shows, download that PDF and follow those directions. It made my life so much easier, and I guarantee you it will make yours too. So there you go. This isn't a comprehensive list, but it is some of the tips, tricks, and life lessons that I've learned as I've entered quilt shows. One of the most important lessons that I've learned, though, is it's fun to go into a quilt show not expecting any kind of ribbon, but it is a wonderful surprise when you do walk up on your quilt and find a blue ribbon hanging on it. That's what happened to this quilt. I was not expecting a ribbon when I entered it into the North Texas Quilt Festival, and was just super happy it was out there. But then walking into the show and seeing that blue ribbon was such a wonderful surprise, and honestly, it made it even better when I wasn't expecting the ribbon to be there. So just have fun entering that quilt into the show, and who knows, you could end up with some pretty amazing ribbons along your journey. So I think that's going to do it for today's video. If you have any questions in the future, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And if you have any personal experience that you want to share, feel free to leave it in the comments as well. I always love reading those comments and seeing what you have to say. Thank you guys for joining me today. And remember guys, normal is just a setting on the dryer. Bye.